Hey everybody, welcome back to Inside Man United. My name is Rowan Brennan, and today we're just going to go over the Man United Spurs result. This is a 4 key takeaways episode from that result. A pretty difficult weekend for United and Eric Ten Hag's men. It's showing worrying signs, so we're going to get into the result. I was busy all weekend, so it was nice to actually be able to digest a lot of the different reactions and dissections of the match and give me time to kind of formulate what I think are the most important 4 takeaways from this game. So let's get into it. So to kick things off, number 1, Mason Mount. Mason Mount's had a pretty difficult start to life at Manchester United. He looks a little lost. He looked a little despondent on the bench after he was substituted off again. It's not looking great for Mason Mount. And he's starting to kind of prove why the doubters were doubting before he moved. A lot of United fans weren't excited by the move. I was one of them. I just don't see what he's supposed to be doing. Now, in the first half, United were actually quite dominant. I thought they were kind of carving Spurs open at will, but upon closer inspection, you'll see that United's dominance, I wouldn't even say dominance, but they were the better team in the first half. They were capitalizing on a lot of Tottenham's mistakes. They were pressing high. Maybe they were forcing those mistakes. You got to give United credit for that. But United were capitalizing on Spurs' mistakes, and they were pressing high up the pitch, winning the ball back and going on these quite fast counterattacks. But Mason Mount is not really doing a huge amount, either in defense or in creation. He looks busy. He runs around a lot. And there's a player we just sold to Turkey for not a lot of money, 12 million quid, who fits exactly that description. Runs around a lot, very, very busy, but no one really knew what they did. Now, of course, I'm talking about Fred. What does he do in attack? What does he do in defense? Is he just running around a lot, looking busy, throwing in tackles, sometimes winning them, sometimes giving away free kicks, losing the ball when he shouldn't be? Mason Mount's doing exactly the same thing. So Eric Ten Hag has a big weight of responsibility now because Mason Mount was a huge signing, and as was Antony, and we'll get on to Antony later on. But Mason Mount needs to really figure out what he is supposed to be for that team. Both he and Bruno are pushed very high up the pitch. So we've got these kind of 2 number 8s, 10s that are pushed quite high up the pitch. So we have a 5 up front and we have a 5 down low. But the fact is Casemiro, as the extra person in that defensive line, is completely isolated and being overran. And what happened against Wolves precisely happened against United. Maddison and Yves Bissouma ran the show. This is a very different Spurs outfit than it was under Antonio Conte. Conte, a very defensive manager, playing a very defensive style of football, would have Spurs playing quite low, and dropped Bissouma for Højbjerg, who shouts a lot, points a lot, runs around a lot, but isn't half the player that Yves Bissouma is. Yves Bissouma under Ange Postecoglou has now won 2 Man of the Match awards in a row and dominated that midfield and looked every bit the player that Spurs bought from Brighton. And then obviously gave Moises Caicedo his opportunity at Brighton. Yves Bissouma was immense for Tottenham, as was James Maddison. That midfield partnership, I think, is going to be very, very potent. And if they replace Richarlison with a decent striker, I think Spurs are going to be quite a difficult outfit for a lot of teams to solve. So first things first, Mason Mount needs to drop a little bit deeper. Maybe Bruno needs to drop deeper and leave Mason Mount up front, and Bruno, maybe pull the strings from deep, be that extra man to stop the overload that's happening against Casemiro. But we need to figure out what Mason Mount is supposed to be doing for this team, because every other team member has shown what they can do and why they do it and where they need to do it on the pitch last year. Casemiro always played with a double pivot. That's just 2 players in front of the back 4 defensive line. Casemiro always had a bit of help, whether it was from Eriksen, it was primarily from Bruno. Eriksen likes to play a little bit more advanced. His defensive contributions are very low. But now we see Bruno and Mount both advancing quite far up the pitch. And maybe Ten Hag put a little bit too much faith in Casemiro being able to marshal that midfield and be that defensive screen. He doesn't look fit. He looks a bit leggy. He looks slow. He does look unfit, maybe a tad bit overweight. So having a midfield partner for Casemiro to shore up that defense is crucial. Whether that's Amrabat, whether it's someone else, who knows? But then that means someone else has to be dropped. Is it Bruno? Is it Mount? Big questions there that need to be answered, and we'll see what happens. Number 2, finishing ability. So despite United's poor performance, if you can call it that, in the second half, we did have chances. Antony should have scored. Bruno absolutely should have scored from 6 yards out. An appalling miss, which I think he'll lose a bit of sleep over that. We were carving out chances and we weren't able to finish it. Benny McCarthy was lauded when he came in last year for bringing some finishing know-how to the team, and we saw Marcus Rashford turn into a goal-scoring machine, the likes of which we hadn't seen before, and we credited Benny McCarthy with that. The finishing is now non-existent, where Marcus Rashford does not look the same level of sharpness he did last year. Our forward players are missing gilt-edged chances, and the only goal we've scored was a combination of Aaron Wan-Bissaka and Raphael Varane. Our XG is supposed to be 4.6, so we should be having, if you want to round it up, 5 goals between these two games. So Ten Hag can rest assured insofar as that the new formation and tactics that he's trying to play, they are yielding opportunities. That much is evident. The XG is there. You could see the opportunities being carved out in the first half of that Spurs game. Even Ange Postecoglou after the match said United probably did have the better chances and more of them, but we took ours. And that's exactly it, finishing. I mean, we could have had 2 or 3 goals reasonably handily had our players had their scoring boots on. That could have been 3-2 United. Fairly straightforward. Throw on top those 2 penalties as well, which were very poor, but you can't be relying on a referee's call of penalties to get the win. It's like leaving a fight in the hands of the judges. You need to get it done with the tools you have available, and don't be waiting on other people's opinion to bail you out of an average or even a poor performance. Our finishing is bad, and it's something that needs to be corrected. It's known Erik Ten Hag is battering down the door of the boardroom saying, I need a striker. There's apparently a bid come in for Martial, or there's a bid in the offing coming from Saudi. Would we take it? I would imagine we would. I think Ten Hag has made it quite clear he can't rely on Martial. He did come on and get some minutes purely because we are so low in personnel up in those front areas. Finishing is a real problem for us. So the chances are being created. The performances are still poor. Midfield still does need to be rectified, but chances are being created. We're just not putting them away. So finishing is something that we really do need to get our act together on. Number 3 is wide players. United's always been known as a team that has excellent wide players, whether it's Giggs, Kanchelskis, or Beckham, Ronaldo. Wide players have always been something we've been known for, bombing up and down the wings, creating chances, overlaps, overloading those attacking areas. Our wide players are not performing. Antony is a real worry because Ten Hag clearly has a bit of favoritism towards Antony. He's our record signing, 100 million. Huge amount. It was probably 2.5 times what Ten Hag originally planned on spending, which was 40 million. Excuse me. But for one reason or another, the price spiraled out of control for various reasons. And 100 million is the price tag that was slapped on Antony. We could have walked away from that deal at 100 million. So, he's not worth it. Ten Hag backed a move for 100 million for Antony. He thought Antony is worth it. As we've seen so often with players coming from the Eredivisie, it's a completely different ball game. I mean, we've seen Haller, who was at West Ham and was very poor, go to that Ajax team and light up the Eredivisie for Ten Hag. Donny van de Beek ended up on the Ballon d'Or list. We've seen Mattia Kezman coming from Ajax to Chelsea back then. I think he had 140 goals in 150 games. It is a different ball game. Daley Blind came over, didn't quite make it either. We've seen countless players come over from the Dutch league and they just do not click. There is a massive jump in level between the Eredivisie and the Premier League. And I think Antony, I genuinely fear that he doesn't have it. I don't think he's going to make it at United. He's a bit of a one-trick pony. I hope I'm proven wrong. I hope this doesn't end up being one of those early day Ronaldo shouts where he's just a show pony. He's going to get shown up and he'll never kick on. Antony seems to be, he's not very slow. He doesn't bang in crosses all day. He does one thing and one thing only. And he doesn't do it the way Ribery or Robben did. Cut inside on the left foot, take a shot, or try and lay it off for a 1-2, or try and pass it into a striker. The bad thing about that is that when you're known that you're always going to come in and you're never going to go on your outside foot to swing a cross in, that means the defender, number one, knows what you're going to do. But number two, if he knows you're going to come in, Antony's never going to be stretching that back line and pulling those fullbacks away from those central positions to allow the likes of Bruno and Mount space to come in and exploit that space. When Antony is attacking up those wings, when you know he's going to come in onto his left foot, that squeezes the fullbacks in with the centre halves. So you're going to be making those spaces a lot tighter. You're going to have a defensive overload in the central positions because you're never going to go outside to the byline or to the goal line to cross that ball in. So you're compressing your opponent's defense. You're making the spaces a lot tighter for your offense, and it makes it a lot more difficult to feed the ball through. And if you do get through, for there to be space for that shot to be taken. So the predictability with which Antony plays his game is a real hindrance, not only for his own performance, but for the space that it affords the people in the more central positions. Garnacho has looked frustrated. He has not been playing at the level he did last year. Maybe the weight of expectation is weighing on him. Second season syndrome, it's quite common. I believe he's got the nerve, the ability, the aggression, and the confidence to play through that. I have every confidence in Garnacho becoming the player we think he's going to become. How he removes Rashford from those left areas, who knows? But, maybe he rotates with Rashford more often than not. As we've seen from City, you need a very strong, world-class squad with two players for every position if you want to be able to mount a credible title defence. So our wide players have been hugely profligate. They've been very wasteful. They've looked lazy. They're unproductive. And it's a real weak point for us that we need to fix. And finally, number 4 is the midfield area. We have a real problem there in that we now have square pegs and round holes. Again, there'll be a bit of repetition on this point because of what we discussed with Mount. But with Casemiro looking so isolated, it's very, very important that we find the personnel to come in and sit alongside him. Now, I think what's going to happen is, if we brought in Benjamin Pavard, he basically is a centre-half that can play at right back. And as we've seen at Manchester City, they play with 4 centre-backs along the back line. Why? It allows them to overload the midfield with a player and then have one of the full-backs, who's technically a centre-half, come in to join the middle two to make a back 3 of centre-halves, while one of your wing-backs joins the midfield and creates that box. So you're going to have one of the full-backs, whether it's Nathan Ake or it's Kyle Walker, joining Rodri at the base of the midfield. So you've got a 3-2, and then you've got your 2 attacking players in the midfield, and then you've got your 3 above that. That's what Ten Hag is trying to do, and it's not working all that well. Shaw is the one that's technically supposed to be joining Casemiro. Shaw's not playing that well. Casemiro still ends up overloaded, and I think what Pavard is going to do is maybe come in and take Wan-Bissaka's spot, despite how good he's playing. Why would you replace Wan-Bissaka? He's, incredible in the slide tackle, brilliant defensively. Yeah, but there's a lot of different elements that are required to be a very effective fullback. It's a very varied job. And to be honest, I think it requires a lot more skill than centre halves. And that was not something you'd have said 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. Centre halves are always the best defenders, and the fullbacks were, the guys maybe who didn't make it as a winger, the guys who were too short to be a centre half. Wingbacks now have a huge weight of responsibility, both in offense and defense. And I think there is limitations with Wan-Bissaka, what he can do. I think Pavard does change that, and it might allow Martinez to join Casemiro, who is far more defensive-minded. He played in that position for Ajax a number of times as a central defensive midfielder. We wondered whether that was going to be his position before he joined United, given our lack of a defensive midfielder. Remember, we did sign Casemiro very late in the window, so when he was joining, we had Maguire, we had Lindelof, and we thought, well, maybe he's coming in as a central defensive midfielder. Obviously, he hasn't. He came in as a centre half, but he can basically play that hybrid role and play as a central defensive midfielder and come out from that back line and have Pavard, Varane, and Shaw tighten up that back line while Martinez gets a little bit more advanced and helps out Casemiro to create that midfield for that box formation. So a lot of moves, I think, are required for United to be able to execute the type of strategy that Ten Hag wants to execute. Mount at the moment is a square peg in a round hole. He's not doing enough up front, and the absence that he's providing at the back is exposing Casemiro, and we're conceding far too many chances. So there's a lot of things Erik Ten Hag needs to consider. I think he is now desperate to get players in. We're finding ourselves exactly in the same position as we did last year. Still one or two players short in the first 2 games of the season, really highlighting the weaknesses in the team, and which is surprising given how well we finished the season last season, despite the injuries and the performances we were putting in, the confidence that we had, the players that we'd recruited. I thought we'd be able to take that into this season, but the players don't look fit. Some look a little unhappy or not bothered. It's a bit of a strange coming together of a few different elements that are resulting in United playing this poorly. But answers are required. A lot of questions have been asked of this team, and I think it's going to be a very busy couple of weeks, with United probably needing to get in another central defensive midfielder, a 6 or an 8, probably Amrabat, hopefully. And then another defender in Benjamin Pavard to cover those right areas and to come in central defence if and when Martinez or Varane can't play. So roll on Forest this weekend. I'll be doing a match preview for that as well. So yeah, let's see how things develop. Mason Greenwood news is supposed to be announced today as well. If and when that does come out, I'll hopefully have a reaction video to that, depending on what it is. It's going to make for an interesting day, but then again, we've seen these delays happen before. Thanks for tuning in. Please hit that like button if you like this content, and hit the subscribe button if you'd like to get notifications if and when my videos are coming out. I'm trying to do this at least once a day. Thanks for tuning in. Catch you on the next one.